Well, first, thanks for letting me drop into your team meeting. Leslie and I were having some conversations about just some research that I've been doing and some work that I've been doing around a guy named Naval Ravikant. Some of you may follow him. Some of you may know who he is. Just as a little bit of background, it's someone that I actually think is one of the better thought leaders in the world today from a business perspective. Maybe not outside of that, but he is the individual that started AngelList. He's invested in about 200 or so early stage startups, typically Series A early funding. Some of those are Uber and Airbnb and some of the more prominent ones. He's invested in 7 what they call unicorn startups, which are privately held companies that reach an evaluation of $1 billion. They're called unicorns because they rarely exist. And so he's a bright guy when it comes to business. But what I wanted to do today, which is a little bit different, is share some of my favorite thoughts from this individual. One of them is on your screen today. Naval says this, that we need to play long-term games with long-term people. Play long-term games with long-term people. What he says is all the returns in life, whether in wealth, whether in relationships, or whether in knowledge, come from compound interest. So we're not going to get all mathy on you today and talk about compound interest. Hopefully all of us understand that concept and how incredible compound interest is. It's the gift of the financial gods to us. But more importantly, Naval says that playing long-term games with long-term people will bring us all the returns in our life. And this has been on my mind more recently. Many of some of our family members have celebrated anniversaries recently. They're playing a long-term game with long-term people, and the return on that relationship is incredible. Some of our family members and agents have had anniversaries with workmates, right, and work relationships. And they receive incredible returns when they play long-term games with long-term people. I also recognize we're in an industry where Naval says we need to pick an industry where you can play long-term games with long-term people. And real estate is one of them. I believe that all of us picked an industry where we can play long-term games with long-term people. We are going to be helping people buy and sell real estate for a very, very long time, I believe forever. And we need to make sure that we're in business with long-term people, meaning people that are committed to that process forever as well. This is an interesting conversation today because there was an announcement yesterday about Gary Keller. And Gary plays long-term games, and he is a long-term person, right? This real estate is his world and his life. Our industry isn't typically that way, guys. Our industry is typically an industry where people go from this relationship to that relationship to this team to that team, or on a team, off a team, this brokerage to that brokerage. And honestly, we are losing the compound interest in relationships when we do that. I think it's a concept, right? Pick an industry where you can play long-term games with long-term people, and then ask yourself, am I playing a long-term game? And do I have long-term people by my side? Are the leaders of the organization, are the leaders in my personal organization, on my team, in my business, are they playing long-term games with long-term people? Here's another thought. And feel free to screenshot if you want. But these are all Naval quotes. I'm not taking any credit for any of this. I'm sharing some of my favorite things that he has either said in an interview, written in blogs, or on tweets that he's delivered. He says compounding in business relationships is very important. Look at some of the top CEOs. They are trusted because of the relationships they've built and the work they've done has compounded. Interestingly enough, guys, we're in an interesting world right now where we're separated more than we wish we were. And if we're not careful, the compound relationship that we built with each other can break down because we're not adding compound interest physically. But over time, people teach you and train you to either trust them or not. And I think this is a really powerful one for us to ask ourselves as people are in business with me longer and longer and longer and longer. Do they trust me or doubt me? This is the one that I've thought about probably the most. He says, work as hard as you can. Many of us, as I look across the faces, and some of us don't have our cameras on, but that's okay. As I look across many of the faces that are on camera, you guys are hard workers. The person that's on my screen right now is Leslie. It is hard to find a harder worker, and I mean that, right? We may not see that every day, but I see that every day. He says this: work as hard as you can. Yes, that's important, but he dives into that and says, here's what may not be as popular. Working hard is not the most important thing in success. It's not number one, it's not number two, it's not number three. He says it might be 5 or 6 on the list. So notice what the second sentence says: even though who you work with and what you work on are more important than how hard you work. Right? Who you're in business with, what you're doing in that business is way more important than hard work. And here's how I know that. Because for the first 10 years of my business in my life, I worked my business life, I worked really hard. I worked just as hard in the first 10 years as I did the second 10 years. I just did it with the wrong people working on the wrong things. And I've seen a dramatic difference in the next 10 years versus the first 10. Do I work any harder today than I did back then? No. So working hard is important. He says work as hard as you can, but who you work with and what you work on is just as important. So be careful. Next, when you find the right thing to do, when you find the right people to work with, invest deeply. Now, here's what we don't want to hear: sticking with it for a year. Now, sticking with it for a couple years. Sticking with it for decades is really how you make the big returns in your relationship and your money. Some of us have been in relationships, business or personal, for literally decades. And you think, is the relationship stronger, deeper, more meaningful today than it was year 1, year 2? Some of us might think, well, it was really fun in year 1, but is it more meaningful in year 10 or year 15? It absolutely is. Compounding relationships over time is critical. Now, as you dive in, as you commit to who you're working with and what you're working on, he says, arm yourself with specific knowledge. Naval talks about specific knowledge a lot. So he says, arm yourself, and we're going to dive into that in just a minute. Arm yourself with specific knowledge, arm yourself with accountability, and arm yourself with leverage. Those 3 things. What do they mean? Specific knowledge is found by pursuing your genuine curiosity and passion rather than whatever is hot right now. We have to be careful in this industry because there's lots of things that come that are hot right now and not tomorrow. They're hot right now, and then a year from now, it's like, remember when we used to? That's not specific knowledge. In fact, that is actually, Naval says, if you're not careful, that's replaceable. Specific knowledge is found by pursuing your genuine curiosity and passion. What does that mean? He says building specific knowledge will feel like play to you, but look like work to others. I think many of us get that because many of us love what we do, right? When we think about, well, this really isn't work to me, it feels like I'm playing. That's because you were back here building a business on specific knowledge by pursuing genuine curiosity and passion, such that when people look at you, they're like, wow, he or she works really hard. And you're like, no, I play really hard. Like, this is enjoyable. Naval says, then we apply specific knowledge with leverage, and eventually you get what you deserve. Now, it's interesting because Diana used to say, you get what you deserve in your imagination. But Naval says, if you apply specific knowledge and you have leverage, you will get what you deserve. That hard work, because he told you earlier to work hard over decades, over long periods of time, that will pay off because you're compounding. The work is compounding, the relationships are compounding, right? The energy is compounding. From one of the wealthiest men in the world, he says being wealthy is about knowing what to do, who to do it with, and when to do it. Being wealthy is much more about understanding than purely hard work. Fair? I have to remind myself that a lot, because I can easily convince myself that if I just put my head down and I just outwork anybody, then I'm going to be okay. But the fact is that's not what's most important. It's knowing what to do, who to do it with, and when to do it. It reminds me of Ben Horowitz in The Hard Thing About Hard Things, because he says the best CEOs, make the right decision when there are no right decisions to make. Knowing what to do, who to do it with, and when to do it. This one will hit home. Reading is faster than listening. Doing is faster than watching. Doing is faster than watching. And he says the most important skill for getting rich or being wealthy is what? Becoming a perpetual learner. So ask yourself, gosh, do I show up as a perpetual learner? Am I constantly showing up to the table and looking to learn? Interestingly enough, there is no better organization, if you chose this industry, to be at than Keller Williams if you're going to be a perpetual learner. So is that valuable to you? I can't answer that question. However, I take a step back and say, gosh, if Naval says the most important skill to getting wealthy is becoming a perpetual learner, then I'm going to do it, right? Then I'm at the right place. But that also involves me removing my ego and saying, well, gosh, no, I know how to do this. I'm good. I'm just going to put my head down. Business comes to me. I take care of people. That may all be true, but to build wealth, we need to be perpetual learners. We're in a competitive industry, aren't we? So here's one of my favorite Naval quotes. Escape competition through authenticity. We have a brokerage full of authentic human beings. You're all very different. That's what I love about the brokerage business. We can bring together independent contractors that are all very different, all authentic. He said, basically, when you're competing with people, and we have to be careful because this industry loves competition, but when you're competing with people, it's because you're copying them. It's because you're trying to do the same thing. But every human is different. Don't copy. It doesn't mean don't learn from other people, right? We use that word. Try to be someone else doing only what they do, and we're not authentic to who we are. You know where I see that show up here or in this industry? It's all of a sudden we want our business to be just like theirs, and we're not really sure why, other than, well, they're defined as successful and maybe you don't feel that way. That's not authentic, right? Building a cookie cutter business just like everybody else isn't authentic. Naval says escape competition through authenticity. And again, as I look around the room, some of you are incredibly authentic. You're building your business in different ways. And interestingly enough, that is what will separate you as well. So let's talk about accountability, right? He talked about leverage, right? He talked about learning, and he said accountability is something as well. Embrace accountability and take business risks under your own name. Here's what happens. He talks a lot about when CEOs are willing to put their name on it, are willing to make that call and say, hey, I own this. Here's what happens is you embrace accountability, you take the good or the bad, and he said society will reward you with responsibility, equity, and leverage by taking accountability. It's interesting. Many of us may know people that it's never their fault. They didn't do it, right? Like some of us have kids that way. Wasn't me. She said it. She told me to. Like the fact is that when we embrace accountability, and in our business, right? When something goes wrong, picking up the phone, calling the client and saying, you know what? It doesn't matter who on the team did it or who dropped the ball. Could have been title, could have been mortgage. Picking up the phone and saying, hey, I own this. I wish I could have made this better for you, right? Society will reward you with responsibility, equity, and leverage. Naval often uses this quote, give me a lever long enough and a place to stand and I will move the earth, right? That is leverage. Now, oftentimes we think about people in leverage, but Naval says accountability is leverage. He says leverage is a force multiplier for your judgment. So I'm sharing some of this content with you today because it's content that I'm well, you're getting it before my team, but I put this together to share with my team. I believe that in 2020, what separates the most brilliant business people is good judgment, right? And that's a word that we don't necessarily hear, and oftentimes we hear the first part of it and we think it's a negative word, like we shouldn't judge people, right? However, using judgment in business decisions is critical. Leverage is a force multiplier for your judgment. And judgment, Naval says, requires experience. So what happens if you just jumped in? What happens if you just got into real estate? And I would say as a business owner, we experience, if we have it, I would begin using the word judgment because the judgment is built through experience, right? Judgment is built through experience. Now, how do we build that? By learning foundational skills. Naval said what has made him so different clearly different. How do you pick 7 unicorn companies, right? Like some people go decades in their whole life as an investor and never invest in that right company. He said he learned foundational skills, right? He studied foundational skills. He studied science. He studied math. He studied biology, right? He studied theory. For us in our business, we're not investing in stocks or companies. So our foundational skills, if we stop learning foundational skills, then our judgment for our clients will stop as well. It doesn't matter how many deals we do if we stop learning foundational skills. Naval says fortunes require leverage. Now, notice where leverage comes from. Leverage comes from capital, right? Leveraging money. Leverage comes from people. And leverage comes from products with no marginal cost of replication. Now, I want us to hear that because some of us, right, like we get to choose what size business we want. But if our only business is based on my time, your time, right, then that product, right, your knowledge does have a marginal cost of replication. In other words, you have to be there. But fortune requires you to truly use leverage such that whether or not you are there or whether or not you are speaking, that you have capital, people, and a product working. So that brings us down this path of scale. Are we building a scalable business? Is that system that we're working on to sell or buy homes truly a system? One of my favorites, be patient. He said, great people have great outcomes. So are you a great person? Then I promise you will have great outcomes. You just have to be patient. It never happens in the time scale you want, but it does happen. He says, if you're counting, you will run out of patience before success actually arrives. Along those same lines, your real resume, just a catalog of all your suffering. You have to do hard things to create your own meaning in life. And all the returns, remember from the beginning, whether in wealth, relationship, or knowledge, come from that compound interest. So how do you build it? How do you take a step back and say, okay, am I on the right path? You know what he says? He says when he picks companies, when he picks partnerships, he only looks for 3 things. He said, I look for high intelligence, I look for energy, and above all, I look for integrity. So then look at your partners, right? Look at your leadership. Do they have high intelligence? Do they have high energy? And do they have high integrity? Those 3 things have been the key to him partnering, right, with hundreds of incredibly successful businesses. I was just on call with a potential team leader candidate for one of our offices. And I shared this with him. Naval says there's two things that we each need to be in order to be unstoppable. He said you need to learn to sell and you need to learn to build. Now, some of us are incredible salespeople, but we're not great business people, right? We just don't know how to build businesses. And some of us are just masterminds at building business, but we're terrible salespeople. The interesting thing is this is the perfect industry to build something unstoppable. Why? Because we have to sell and we have to build. And the most brilliant real estate agents learn to sell and learn to build. So again, I go back and say, then I need to be part of an organization that teaches sales. Well, we do that, but also teaches how to build business. Well, we do that, right? All different kinds, all different types, all different levels of business. One of my favorite quotes, Naval says, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right? Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. He said you have to say no to everything and free up your time so you can solve the important problems. Oftentimes, we spend the whole day solving stupid problems, right? Like and I don't really like that word, but we waste our time on unimportant things. Now, he said this, I'm actually more interested in solving problems than I am in making money. But what happens when he solves problems for businesses? The business makes money. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Make sure we're playing smart games. In fact, make sure you're playing long-term games with long-term people. I'm going to go quickly through this section. He says there's a few ways to get lucky, and we get to choose. The first way is we hope luck finds us. Well, I hope I get lucky. The second way is we just work hard until we stumble into it. Like I have my head down, I'm working hard, and oh, boom, I just found some luck. The third way, he said, is we prepare and we're sensitive to chances others miss, right? We're prepared and we're observant and we look at opportunities that other people might miss. They missed it and we see it and we take that opportunity. That's lucky. The fourth way, he said, become the best at what you do. And when you are the best at what you do in a category, guess what shows up? Other people's luck. He said they will bring you their problem to solve, and you already know how to solve it. So what happens? You win, you get lucky. I would say those of us that have referral-based businesses, you are lucky. You're lucky. I don't believe you should build a business on luck. Understand, but you are lucky. If you did 30 deals this year, 40 deals this year, 60 deals this year, congratulations. You became the best at what you do. And so that portion of your business is lucky. You can't necessarily count on it. You can't build a business plan around it. Now, you can be strategic and it could be referral based, but that's strategy. That isn't luck. So be careful. Luck plays into business. By all stretch of the imagination, every single one of us that had a good year this year, which is almost everybody on this call, guess what? You were lucky this year. You were lucky. Why? Either luck found you, you hustled into it, you prepared for it, or you became the best at what you did. So how do we get rich or wealthy without getting lucky? Seek wealth, not money or status. He said there are people that are chasing money and there are people that chase status. Wealth is having assets that earn while you sleep. Money is actually how we transfer time and wealth. Like I trade money for time. We transfer money for wealth, right? I use money to buy assets, whether that asset be a real estate transaction, whether that asset be a business, whether that asset be people. Status is your place in social hierarchy. I think it's important. He talks a lot about how we get stuck in social status, right? In social hierarchy. We place ourselves maybe in production hierarchy. We place ourselves in social hierarchy. Who's the popular one? Who's the well-liked one? Who's the it? And interestingly enough, We deviate from seeking wealth because we're either seeking money or we're seeking status. Ignore people playing status games. They gain status by attacking people playing wealth creation games. So if you find yourself like always finding something wrong with someone else, or yeah, but they did this, or yeah, but they do this, or yeah, they did that, but that's because of this person, be careful. Ignore people playing status games. You'll get rich by giving society what it wants at scale. Right? We're in an industry where we need to focus on the consumer. Gary Keller made a decision over the last couple of months to bring in what? A CEO to focus on what? The consumer, guys. The CEO that he just brought in to run all services is a consumer-fronted, focused CEO. He has an incredible track record of going direct to consumer and working on the consumer experience. He also has a track record of doing that at scale. That's different than Gary's track record, right? Gary's built something at scale for someone that he has passion about, right? Which is the real estate agent, but the consumer is different. Become the best in the world at what you do. Keep redefining what you do until this is true. Become the best at the world. Become the best in the world at what you do. Keep redefining what you do until this is true. Now, we talked about judgment. I'm going to share 2 slides on judgment quickly. Naval says this. I mean, he has some of the best judgment, right, out there. Like, he is paid for his judgment, by the way. He has been paid for his judgment. He says, I try to eliminate what's not going to work. How do we do that in our industry? The beauty is we have an incredibly collaborative organization, company, and need to make sure that organization and company turns into and continues to create a collaborative environment here locally as well. We learn what's not going to work by talking to others that did it and it didn't work. Fair? He said, I think being successful is just about not making judgment mistakes. It's about avoiding incorrect judgments. What we wish to be true clouds our perception of what is true. I wrote this one down in my notebook. He said, what we wish to be true clouds our perception of what is true. Making effective decisions boils down to dealing with reality. What you feel tells you nothing about the facts. And then he said this. He talks at length about making it his goal of being 10% better at making decisions than all of his competition. He said someone who makes decisions 80% of the time instead of 70% of the time will be valued and compensated in the market hundreds of times more. It isn't a 10% gain, guys. Look at Warren Buffett. He makes decisions 80% of the time. The rest of the investors around him, 70% of the time. What's the difference? Billions of dollars of wealth. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to improve your judgment. And that judgment will lead to freedom. My last thought for today, Naval says this, I value freedom above everything else. All kinds of freedom. Freedom to do what I want, freedom from things I don't want to do, freedom from my own emotions or things that may disturb my peace. For me, freedom is my number one value. And freedom will come from us building businesses that lead to wealth. All right, Leslie, that's what I got.